Well, I am not a professional politician, and I'm not seeking a career in public office. What I am, though, is a conservative American. I'm committed to the underlying values that made our nation strong, and I'm also committed to the idea that we'll create for this generation and future generations a nation that will continue to be strong. At heart, I'm a business person. I've made a life out of looking at problems and turning those into opportunities. I'm one of those people that's actually signed both sides of a paycheck and created thousands of jobs. And I believe that's the challenge that we have. My leadership is guided by the Constitution and my faith. My mother was a single mother. She worked hard not only to put food on our table, but to create a generation that was strong in opportunities for me that were much better than what she had. That's why I'm running for the United States Senate.
Okay, let's have a seat.
Thank you.
And we'll go to the first question. The first question is a 2-minute response. For a long time, Congress and many presidents and courts have ignored or circumvented the Constitution. If you're elected, how will you stop this abuse, and will you do anything to reverse past violations?
As I said, I believe that we need to view the Constitution not as an arcane document, but a document that ought to be the rule of law and the rule book that we live by. I believe very strongly in that. And as you pointed out in the question, unfortunately, in too many cases, we've got beyond that. I think it reflects in so many different ways. I think it reflects in spending programs. I think it reflects in regulatory, all of those sorts of things. I think Congress needs to be much more active. I think especially in the area of regulations, which have impeded our economy and destroyed jobs, not created jobs. We need to really come back to the point of Congress being a strong advocate in not delegating their duties and their responsibilities away. So I would be very strong in advocating that. I also believe that there ought to be a litmus test that says when a piece of legislation or idea comes, that we ought to look at that and ask the question, a fundamental question, that says if that piece of legislation or that idea reduces the role of Washington in families and in small businesses, then that ought to go forward. If it does not, then it should go in the trash can. It's those basic litmus tests, looking at it, that I think are going to bring us back to a government that's limited in size, that does what it was intended to do, and in those areas does those well. And that, to me, becomes really the guide, the focus of where we need to be. I would see that as my role, and I would seek that either in legislation going forward or in legislation of turning it back, especially in the programs and the areas that's got into, of eliminating those. I think that also gets to the fiscal side.
What?
Issues that come in.
We've lost the microphone.
And issues that come in.
Nope, still not there. There, now I think you've got
Let's
it.
see if we
There we are.
And issues like that, of literally going through and zero-based budgeting and reducing the programs in the areas that the government's gotten in, that one, we shouldn't have been in, and two, we simply can't afford.
Okay. Question number 2, this is also a 2-minute response. Elected officials seem to have a compelling desire to tweak the capitalistic economy to make it better and fairer for everyone. This only makes it worse, with lower income citizens suffering more because of the tweaking. What can be done to let the free enterprise capitalistic system work as intended, allowing all to benefit according to their individual abilities?
Simply put, get the government out of people's lives on a day-to-day basis, both families and small businesses. You look at the situation that we have today, and clearly there's been an awful lot that's been talked about of the fiscal challenges that face our nation, and clearly those are significant. $14 trillion of debt, that's really not the right number. The number, like any business understands, you add in the long-term obligations and liabilities. We do that, then our number's somewhere in the area of $75 trillion. That translates somewhere in the area of over $500,000 per family. But the other piece of it, the other question is having a growing and strong economy. And that's where Washington's overspending, it's overregulating, it's overtaxing. So simply put, what we need to do is return the responsibilities and put it back on the shoulders of the private enterprise. Now, a lot of people will talk that through, and they'll have all of the 7-second sound bites in place. I can tell you, I've been there. I've run businesses in a variety of different industries. I understand regulatory issues, not just, again, from reading about them, but actually having the scars on my back. I understand tax policy, regulatory policy, all those sorts of elements that go in to creating jobs, and I understand jobs are created in the private sector. It is no wonder to me today that we have a stagnant economy. We have tax policies where businesses don't understand what their taxes are going to be in 18 months. We have healthcare costs where businesses understand less today than they did 12 months ago of what their costs are going to be. We have energy, either through cap and trade policies or excessive costs on the commodity side. All of those pieces, along with the regulatory, have created an economy that, to be truthful with you again, is endangering the future of our nation. And it becomes a security issue on that debt. So what we simply need to do is have people who are business people, who don't want to be career politicians, and simply push it back to the private sector. If we do that, I have enormous faith in the private sector that we'll see a strong, growing economy and we'll be able to address the challenges we have on the fiscal side.
Okay, question number 3. This is also a 2-minute response. Why should U.S. citizens be required by force through taxation to pay for the health care, education, incarceration, and housing of persons who entered the country illegally?
They shouldn't. Very simply put, they shouldn't. This is another example of where Congress, much like spending, has continued to kick the can down the road. Instead of addressing this issue straight on, what they've done is avoided it. And they've avoided it much like in the spending questions because they simply are more interested in getting elected than they are in having a strong nation. We need to confront these issues. If you're in business, you understand issues and problems don't get better. They have to be dealt with. We need to understand the issue that you're raising is putting enormous costs on each and every one of us. And until we address those issues, come in and actually resolve them, then we're going to continue to be in the situation that we're in, where we continue to mortgage off a future generation, where we continue to put more and more costs and have a stagnant economy. The issue is very simply, it is being able to address the issues and going forth and resolve those. And those issues can be resolved. But it means that it's going to have to be people that are making and willing to make very tough choices, and having those choices be made, understanding that it may be the cost of political careers, but it's for the betterment of the country.
Okay, question number 4, a 2-minute response. America was clearly founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs, yet today we see a constant assault on those beliefs. We also see a politically correct approach to the Islamic faith, refusing to speak the truths of that belief. What can be done to level the playing field?
I think in the end it's simply a question of leadership. It is simply a question of leaders that are willing to stand up and say faith is an important element. You know, you look at the Constitution and you look at the people that put that in place. They were people of incredible faith. And not just people who had faith, literally evangelicals, large numbers of evangelicals that were there. You look at the writings that went in to the Federalist Papers. You look at the writings that were the underlying elements of our Constitution. It was men of faith who understood that morals, that values, the idea of belief in God is an important element. As I mentioned a moment ago, faith to me is a very important element. I really believe that our lives center around our faith, and family, work, and everything else revolves around it. I can tell you that the only reason that I'm in public office today is because of that faith. I was approached to run for the office of mayor of the city of Dallas, and I had never run for political office in all of my life, and I never thought that I would. I had run organizations successfully and thought that that's where my life was going to be. And when I was first asked to do it, Laura, my wife, suggested that I go visit with our pastor, and I did. And when I went and visited with our pastor, I went into the living room, his living room. He invited me over, and I said, you know, I've been suggested that I run for us. He literally got up and walked out. I thought, this conversation is going real well. And he came back, and he had written in his message for Sunday, in the margin, and the message was on service, more Christians need to seek public office. And that was pretty influential for us. Again, I think it's simply leadership of people that are willing to stand up, not play the political game that we see all the time and have professional politicians, people that want to have careers in public office, but instead do it the way that our founders intended. And that was simply to have people that have been successful go serve and leave.
The question number 5 is another 2-minute response. Our porous borders are a cultural, financial, and security threat to our country.
I'm sorry, repeat the first part of that.
Our porous borders are a cultural, financial, and security threat to our country. All elected officials talk of securing the border, yet nothing significant gets done. If elected, what will you do to force the president to honor his obligation to secure our borders?
Well, again, I think an example of Congress kicking it down. We need to understand that regardless of what we do, securing our borders becomes a first step. We understood that from history. We understood it back in 1986 when we failed to do it, and as a result, all the policies that followed behind on immigration were lost. We need to approach it in a very straightforward business way. We need to simply sit down with those individuals that are tasked for protecting our borders and put metrics in place that ensure that we measure the porousness of the borders. And then through them, ask them what tools you need. It may be boots on the ground, it may be electronic, it may be walls, whatever it is. And those people that are going to be tasked, make sure that they, from a policy standpoint, which would be the position of the Senate as well as the executive branch, make sure that those tools are in place. And then ensure something that you often don't see on the governmental side and put accountability in place. It needs to be a strong, active Congress that's communicating to the president, and hopefully in 2013 we have a president who will understand these issues and be conscious of working with a Senate and working with a House to make sure these things come in place. But it is finally to put in place some basic metrics and hold people accountable. It is absolutely ludicrous to me that we do not control our borders. This is a country that controlled the borders in World War II of Germany and France, Iwo Jima, places like that. It is not, again, a question of policy. It is a question of implementation, simply getting it done, putting the political side apart and understanding that this is an issue that affects each and every one of us, not only from an immigration standpoint, from a national security standpoint. If you visit with the people on the borders, they will tell you that they see a lot of indications that people from the Middle East, people from Asia are coming across, much less the violent issues that we're seeing with drugs. Borders are critical. It is very obvious that we can control those. It is time that we did those.
Okay, this will be a 30-second response for these next 2 questions. Should every bill passed by the Senate contain a reference to the Constitution that justifies its constitutionality?
Yes, and I think it needs to go further than that. I think there needs to be 3 pieces of a bill that goes forward to change structure. Number 1 is exactly as you said, a reference to the Constitution, again, going back to that rule book of why it should be there. Number 2, a bill should deal with one issue, not have 59 different issues that all get melded together. And 3 is, each bill should have a simple reference that explains what this bill does in layman terms. If we did those 3 things, we would bring a lot of accountability and confidence back to the people.
Okay, this next question, the 30-second response for the next one also. Based on recent events in Washington, will you support any action that increases the national debt?
Absolutely not. As I indicated earlier, this is not only an economic issue, it's a national security issue. We continue to see over the course of the last couple of weeks that we have people that are more interested in making political decisions than they are. And in part because they simply don't understand fiscal issues, how you cut spending, how you address balance sheet type of issues, and they certainly don't understand how to grow an economy. The numbers that we've thrown around over the last couple of weeks didn't have any sense of reality into it, and I can tell you if there was any business that used those numbers, I can tell you the CFO would have been fired within seconds.
Okay, this is a 2-minute response to this, and this is a personal question for you. When running for mayor of Dallas in 2007, you signed an Acorn pledge that said the following: immigration. If elected, I will respect the fact that immigration policy is a federal issue and does not fall under the city's domain. Is that not effectively endorsing the sanctuary city policy? Please explain.
Absolutely not. As I mentioned, Immigration is a critical issue, and I think I've been very clear where I stand on it. Number one, and I will be very clear, no amnesty. 2, addressing the borders issues. And 3, ensuring that we actually address this issue. That simply put, and I'd be a strong advocate, that it needs to be a federal issue. It is one of the key areas that's identified. National defense, protecting our borders. It has to be a federal issue. If we don't address it as a federal issue, then to be truthful with you, you have so many different legislation, so many different pieces that come in that we're simply not going to be able to address it. I believe it is absolutely critical. It's a federal legislation issue. And back then, I said the same thing that I'm saying today. And that is that you have a Congress and you have an executive branch that will not face up to the issues facing this nation. They're willing to turn their back on it at the time when you and I, people here, outside of the Beltway, are paying the cost of that time and time again. We can patchwork any number of things to these problems. You can do it on spending too. But the reality of it is, unless we address these issues in a straightforward fashion and do them in the right way, we will all pay for them. I will also tell you, in regard to that acorn, that was one of several dozen different candidate forums that were put on that I attended, that all the candidates attended. And I was very clear on that, and very clear on where I stood on all those issues, and those are the same as I was today.
Okay, thank you very much. And now you've got a 2-minute summarization. And I'll get out of your way.
First of all, to the Clear Lake Tea Party and to the Alliance, thank you very much for inviting me and having me participate. Our country today is at a precipice. We have issues facing our nation that, as I indicated a moment ago, we have a Congress that's simply turning their back. Today, we need to understand the reality. We have a stagnant economy, and we have quickly mortgaged the next generation. What we need to do is have people that will take positions of leadership. Not people that talk about these issues and have their one paragraph talk about spending, one paragraph talk about growing jobs and those sorts of things. But instead have people who don't want to be career politicians, that are committed to resolving these issues at the cost, if necessary, of political careers. We need to have people and leaders who have senses of these issues. As I mentioned, I bring a very different background. One not only that you see in the campaign, but a very different background that you see in Washington. I've signed both sides of a paycheck, and I've created thousands of jobs. If over the course of this term of Senate, we do not address the fiscal issues facing our nation, then we're going to lose the opportunity to address those. We'll have so many baby boomers that retire that will lose the opportunity of ever addressing the financial situation. We also have people that don't understand how the private enterprise work. Again, they've got the paragraph down, but they haven't lived there and they don't understand the issues. Without a strong, vibrant economy, then we're not going to be a strong nation. We need to go back and understand the fundamental values that put our nation in place and understand the inherent strength of this nation from the economy that we've enjoyed over the last couple of decades. To do that, we need people that will make tough decisions, not talk about them, and not talk about advancing a conservative agenda, but instead, people that are willing to take actions to advance the conservative agenda. And that's what I offer you. Thank you very much for having me.